Christmas, everybody. Welcome to the next episode of Chris's Classic Cinema. My name is Chris Wired, and this is my good friend.
Hello, I'm Jacob Nemuth.
Welcome, and Merry Christmas again. So today we're going to be looking at 4 classic Christmas films that I'm pretty sure a lot of you know by heart. Spoiler alert, we're not doing iconic ones like It's a Wonderful Life or A Christmas Story. I don't want to shoot my eye out.
No. We are doing some iconic Christmas films, though. There are iconic in their own right, and you may have already seen them before.
Let's face it, with how much time they were on either TV or on DVD, there's no denying they're popular.
But we hope that at least one of these films are going to be new to you, because I know that at least 2 of these films today were films I've never heard of up until today.
Okay. So the first film we're going to be doing, we're going back to 1947. Now, this is a film as iconic as It's a Wonderful Life. And apparently, this was also a very original idea at the time. The movie, Miracle on 34th Street. At Christmas time in New York City, a divorced mother and her daughter begin to question if a department store Santa is the real Santa Claus. A lot of people deem him as insane, but it's up to the divorced mother's boyfriend, a lawyer, to defend him and even claim that he is the real Santa Claus.
Spoiler alert, the Postal Service gets involved. Mafia style.
Well, not like the gunslinger style.
No, not gunslinger style. I mean, we'll get to that.
Now, this one I just love so much. It feels like with all the Christmas movies I've seen, they all feel like a warm hug, especially this time of year.
I think this one's probably, out of all the movies we'll discuss today, probably the warmest of the bunch. Because this is such a lighthearted film, especially following the perspective of the little girl, little Susie, I think is her name, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So following the perspective of the little girl for much of the film, especially with the hesitation of whether or not Santa Claus is real, it's a great movie for kids who are questioning whether or not Santa is real.
Yeah, it's just like that whole newspaper article where a guy wrote to a girl named Virginia that there is a Santa Claus.
Oh, yeah, and it definitely harnesses the magic of Christmas.
And even has this very big theme that I think a lot of people don't really understand. Faith is believing in something when common sense tells you not to.
Exactly. I couldn't agree more with that sense.
With that, let's talk about the cast. First, let's talk about the divorced mother, Maureen O'Hara, and her boyfriend, Mr. Gailey, played by John Payne.
Yes. Initially, O'Hara didn't actually want to be in the film. Because, this is 47, just 2 years after World War II. She actually initially went back home to Ireland and didn't want anything to do with going back to America to do a film until she read the script and completely did a 180 and flew back to the States for the film.
Yeah, the screenplay was written by future Oscar winner George Seaton. The story was originally created by a guy named Valentine Davis. You can actually find a novel he actually wrote like a novelization of the movie.
Yeah, which was released in tandem with the film.
Yes, and I think it was also like a bestseller.
It was a bestseller, and the movie itself was also a real big hit in that box office, despite the type of year it was released in. It wasn't released around Christmas time, not even close.
It was released in July.
June. It was released in June, and the thought process behind that was actually interesting.
Yeah, and that in the original trailer, they had this whole thing of people getting hyped for the movie, but they had no idea what even the movie was about.
No, which is hilarious considering that the filming of the movie was literally done under everybody's noses, especially with this is one of my favorite scenes in the movie, the Macy's Day Parade.
Right at the beginning, and Maureen O'Hara, she meets a guy named Kris Kringle, played by Emin Gwen, and he comes across the Santa that they have is drunk, so she wants him to replace the drunk Santa, and he's willing to do it to make the kids happy. And the footage that we see, that is the actual Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade from 1946.
Yep. It was done with 9 cameras in tandem, and from what I've read, it was actually a bit of a nightmare to coordinate that because they had one shot. They had to do it in one take with 9 cameras simultaneously while moving the cameras along the parade route.
Well, I'm pretty sure that's the same thing with every Thanksgiving Day parade in New York.
Well, that's because this is the first Thanksgiving Day in New York. Nobody had ever done it before.
Well, it wasn't the first parade.
It wasn't the first parade, but it was the first time it was videoed taped in its entirety for the sake of this film, actually. And it was done without anybody knowing it.
Now let's talk about the guy who plays Kris Kringle, Edmund Gwenn, because my God, he is definitely one of the best versions of Santa I have ever seen.
Yes, one of the most legendary incarnations of Santa. Like, of course, Tim Allen's always going to be my personal favorite incarnation of Santa, but I think this one still holds a historic place, in my heart at least, as one of the better renditions, because
he's so warm, he's so wonderful, he's so kind. You almost want to doubt that. It makes you doubt that that people count. It makes you feel bad that people actually think he's insane because of how nice he is.
Well, not only that, but goaded him to kind of break his persona in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, Maureen O'Hara and her daughter Susie, played by a very young Natalie Wood. They doubt that he's the real Santa Claus, but the more they get to know him, the more they begin to question if he's real or not.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And when it comes to the little girl, I mean, she was raised, her mother basically raised her without any fairy tales or any fantasy of any kind. But this is a whole new thing for her.
Yeah. And even back then, that was extremely uncommon. That kind of upbringing for a lot of young youth today is brought up with that, unfortunately. Back then, it was super uncommon and almost frowned upon. You would almost think that she's kind of a buzzkill for Christmas, despite her being one of the department store heads. But
Maureen O'Hara, she does a great job, and as well as the guy who plays her boyfriend, Mr. Gailey.
Oh yeah, very, very.
You can tell how supportive he is of Kris Kringle, and like I said, he's willing to defend him in court to convince people that he is the real deal.
Oh yeah, yeah. Even going as far as getting the post office involved, which is my second favorite scene in the film.
Yeah. Let's also talk about some other characters. There's the psychologist, Mr. Sawyer, and he's perhaps one of the grouchiest guys I've ever seen in a movie. Mm-hmm. He's basically the kind of guy that you don't want to talk to around Christmas time. He must be one of those kids that kept getting lumps of coal when he was a kid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was definitely one of those characters that you wanted to hate, but it was done so by design.
And then you have the guy who plays the head of the Macy's department, Mr. Macy.
Mr. Macy himself. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and he's actually very supportive of Mr. Kringle. He's not the big bad boss or anything. He's very supportive, and he's also very generous too.
But part of that, I think, is because of the publicity behind Kris Kringle. Because Kris Kringle in the movie generated a ton of really, really good publicity, and Macy's could say, we have the genuine article, and that brings in a lot of foot traffic.
Even bringing in the rival company that they were going against, Gimbels, which has been gone for many decades.
Oh yeah. And even now, Macy's still kind of struggles in the sense of, nowadays, like they struggle to make ends meet nowadays. But back then, they were the goats. Macy's and Sears and Gimbels and even Woolworths, those were the big four.
Yeah. And when it comes to the way they bring this movie to life, it's just amazing.
It's very magical. And you will note, I'm actually going to note something towards the end of the film. Around Christmas, there was no snow. There was very, very little snow in the movie. Did you notice that?
Yeah, I noticed too. But still, it's just the story itself that makes it just feel so warm and welcoming. Mm-hmm. I mean, the relationship that the people have with Mr. Kringle, especially the kids, and then you have the mothers you have the mother who brought in her adopted daughter, and he just starts speaking Dutch to her, and she's like, oh my gosh, you are the real Santa Claus.
Of course, because who else but the real Santa Claus would be polylingual?
Yeah. Along with that, there's also the editing. The music is very just cheerful. Mm-hmm. And it also has some early cameos of some later celebrities. The mother who questions Mr. Kringle of her going to another store, that's future Oscar nominee Thelma Ritter. who starred in many movies, including All About Eve, Albert Hitchcock's Rear Window, and the guy who... And later in the film, when Maureen O'Hara sends a letter to Kris Kringle, the guy who picks it up happens to be future Oscar winner Jack Albertson, a.k.a. Grandpa Joe from Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
That's not going to be the only mention of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory today.
No kidding. Yeah. Oh, yes, I can agree to that. Now, when it comes to this film, though, it's so good. And it really makes you want to believe that there is a Santa Claus.
It really does. Yeah, it definitely brings about the imagination. And they didn't use hardly any special effects or anything like that. Nothing out of the ordinary when it comes to filming. The most out of the ordinary thing was the filming of the Macy's Day Parade. And the only other noteworthy thing in terms of production value is the colorization of it. It's the very first film to get retroactively colorized, and they did so in 1985.
I'm not a fan of colorizations.
I'm not either, but this was the first, full-featured film to ever get that.
Yeah, well, it's happened with other films like It's a Wonderful Life. I know they did it once for King Kong and Casablanca, but those were highly criticized.
There's also another movie revealed during our Halloween special, Metropolis, that got colorized as well.
Yes, that is true.
So this was kind of the first, actual real attempt to colorize a full feature-length classic.
Now, when it comes to Miracle on 34th Street, it was a hit with critics. It was a huge hit at the box office. It received 4 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture, and it ended up winning 3, including Best Supporting Actor, Edmund Gwenn, the only Oscar-winning performance of a Santa Claus, and Best Screenplay.
Yeah. And it really goes to show. And again, they released this in the summer, too. And the reason they released it in the summer was because it was actually tactical, because they wanted more foot traffic. They figured that more people would be willing to see a movie in the summertime than they would in the wintertime.
And they still had it in theaters even up to Christmas.
Yep, and it worked. It worked. You don't see too many out of season movies like that. Like nowadays, like in recent years, we see Star Wars get a Christmas release, and as well as a slew of other Christmas specials.
And then you have all those superhero movies that are released in the summer.
Oh yeah. So yeah, nowadays you don't really see that too much anymore. But this was one of the rare instances throughout cinematic history of all time where it was released out of season and then was also a smash hit.
And the American Film Institute loved this film too. They named it as one of the top 10 most inspiring films in their list of 100 cheers, and as one of the top 10 greatest fantasy films of all time. Mm-hmm. And another Christmas film was on that list as well. It's a Wonderful Life.
Yep. Released same year, I think, isn't it?
No, a year before.
Oh, okay.
But the next film we're going to be talking about was released that same year.
And let's not get ahead of ourselves. We have a rating to give.
That is right. What would you give it?
I'm going to be a little less than generous, okay? He's going to castrate me. I apologize. I'm giving it a solid 3. And the only reason I'm giving it a solid 3 is because I've watched it so many times that I've kind of gotten bored of it. Other than that, it's a great film. And I recommend any kid watch it. If you have kids at home, and they're starting to doubt the belief of Santa Claus, and you still want to keep that magic going, throw on this movie, because I bet you that'll convince them for a few more years.
Well, I'm giving this a 4.5, and I'd also like to recommend the 1994 remake that was written by John Hughes.
Oh, yeah.
Starring Oscar winner Richard Attenborough as Kris Kringle. Yeah, that's right. John Hammond got to play Santa Claus.
Yeah. Actually, you know what? Out of the two, I would recommend the 94 one over the original, just because it's a little bit more modern. It's got color, and it's a bit easier to sit through for the young kids. Young kids, if they see black and white, are probably going to go,
Well, I guess I can't argue with that, but I prefer both.
Oh, yeah, they're both good. They're both good.
They both feel like such warm hugs, and man, it's one of my favorite Christmas movies.
Man, Christmas, yeah, high five.
Ouch.
Well, you were getting overly hyped, so I'm just trying to match the hype energy.
Yeah. Okay. So our next film, we're going to be sticking around with 1947 because that same year, another Christmas classic was released, but this time by the famous producer Samuel Goldwyn. A year before, he won Best Picture for The Best Years of Our Lives, and this film would earn him another nomination for that category. The film, The Bishop's Wife, directed by Henry Koster. An angel appears before a bishop and is to give him guidance. But the thing is, he starts to have sort of a relationship with the bishop's wife. But the bishop was wanting to wanting help with building up the cathedral, but the bishop is just spreading Christmas cheer everywhere he goes.
Yeah, of course, Bishop being played by the legendary, and I do mean legendary, Cary Grant, one of the best.
The ghost, the angel was Cary Grant.
The angel was played by Cary Grant, which is who's a legend in his own right.
Yeah, I mean, he's been in so many iconic movies. Arsenic and Old Lace, Charade with Audrey Hepburn.
Mm-hmm.
And you also have Loretta Young as the bishop's wife, David Niven as the bishop.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a wide array of big names as well.
Oh yeah, like this is one of those movies where the cast was in a league of its own. Like we've talked about movies in the past where they have actors and actresses who are in their own league. This is one that's like above all the others. You know, like Cary Grant did such a phenomenal job as the angel.
Dudley.
Yeah, just a phenomenal job, just full of charisma.
And
just oozes of charisma.
And he's always so kind. I mean, he also wants to help people any chance he gets. A mother finds her baby almost getting run over by a car. He saves her right in the nick of time.
Mm-hmm. And not to mention, you know, several occasions of performing miracles as well, just on a whim, like refilling the bottle of wine for the professor.
Or even creating a beautiful Christmas tree.
Mm-hmm. I think my favorite miracle in the film was when the bishop asked Dudley, hey, I want you to perform a miracle. I doubt that you're an angel. And he's like, no, it doesn't work like that, mate. You know? And then, you know, the bishop's like, all right, get out. But in that same scene, you see that the bishop and the angel walk in, and the bishop locks the door. And just casually walks out the door. Just opens the door and closes it. The door's locked, by the way. And then the bishop's like, huh? And just checks the door. No, it's locked. And he's like, what? Okay, okay.
Now, when it comes, this may be a comedy, but it's also a rom-com, especially when it comes to the chemistry between Cary Grant and the bishop's wife, played by Loretta Young. Mm-hmm. And they definitely had a lot of chemistry.
There was a ton of chemistry. And I would argue that it's more platonic than romantic. Like, I get that the movie was supposed to make it a romance more than anything, being a rom-com. But I always felt that when I watched the movie, I felt it was more platonic.
I mean, that whole scene with them ice skating and all that stuff.
Of course. But I don't see that as kind of a romantic thing. I see that as just two friends having a lot of fun.
Yeah, but the thing is, the angel ends up actually wanting to be with her.
Oh, yes. And realized very quickly how dangerous that was.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you also have David Niven as the bishop.
Oh, yeah.
He wants to have his cathedral built. He thinks the angel's going to do it for him, but he's not.
No, because the thing is that the bishop literally went out of his way to make everybody around him miserable for the sake of the cathedral.
Even his own kid.
Even his own kid and wife. It just will do anything to make this happen and kind of forgets the spirit of Christmas in a sense. And kind of forgets that his family and that Christmas time is all about giving back to the need.
Yeah, I mean, Cary Grant, he literally has a typewriter self-typing a sermon that the bishop's going to be presenting on Christmas Eve. You literally see the typewriter doing it all by itself. That's one of my favorite scenes.
I know how they did it. I couldn't find how they did it, but I think I know how they did it.
How?
Teletype.
Do
you know, okay, for those who don't know what a teletype is it's an automatic typewriter that is connected to, actually, the telegraph system. And the telegraph system would send over a signal, and the teletype would automatically type a message out. It's how Newswire, send it over the wire, the phrase sending over the wire came from sending a message to a teletype. That's how news got around really, really quickly.
I think that's also how they did memos back then, too.
Yep, they did memos and everything. So I bet that was just a teletype.
And then you also have the side characters in the movie.
Oh, yeah.
Like there's the old widow who has a sort of a secret past, and she ends up feeling you actually want to just give her a hug.
Yeah, she at first you would think that she's just this old widow who's just really wants her way and her way alone. But then once she interacts with the angel, you start to really sympathize with her. That she really isn't. She's more of a lost soul that is just feels guilty for not honoring her late husband, who she really never loved, which I thought was really compelling. That was really moving.
And the scene when he plays the harp and it's a song from her first love, that was just...
It was amazing. It was very,
the
very
music.
well done.
The music in this movie is phenomenal, courtesy of the composer Hugo Friedhofer. If I recall, he won the Oscar for Best Original Score a year earlier for The Best Years of Our Lives. And also, and then you have the scene with the kids in the church. It was an actual boys' choir at that time, the Robert Mitchell Boys Choir, and Robert Mitchell was like an organist that did music for many decades. And when it comes to the way they performed, it was just beautiful. That's one of the most amazing Christmas hymns I've ever heard.
Yeah. And some other really notable side characters, of course, is the professor and the taxi driver. Those are two that should need not mentioning, that should be mentioned as well. The professor, having writer's block for over 20 years, and has given this historic coin. It comes across this really, really historic coin that was forged by Cleopatra as a gift to Little Caesar, to the great Caesar, and also the taxi driver, just this regular taxi driver, who gets roped into going ice skating.
And he's just having the time of his life.
Yep.
When it comes to the ice skating scene, I really love that. You can definitely tell by the lighting that it's different people doing the ice skating, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the guy who did the camera, Greg Toland, he also did the camera shots in Citizen Kane.
Yeah. But overall, I think the movie this was one of the movies that I feel I've never heard of up to this point. And when I asked when I asked my older relatives, hey, have you ever heard of The Bishop's Wife? A lot of my initial reactions were, oh, that must be a religious film. And that was actually most of the reaction to people back in the day was the movie actually flopped initially because most people mistaken it for a religious film, not a rom-com.
And how do they brought people in? Just put Cary Grant's name in the
No,
title.
they literally called it
Carrie and the Bishop's Wife.
Carrie and the Bishop's Wife. And they even used the tagline, hey, have you heard of the Bishop's Wife? That was one of the taglines used to try and entice people to watch the movie.
Cary Grant, he was a huge star of that time, and it really brought people in.
Oh, yeah. So they used his first name to try and get the movie to be the success that it was. But in the box office, opening week, it flopped miserably. It did become a success after a little bit, but initially it was a flop.
But critics loved it. The same year as Miracle on 34th Street, it was nominated for Best Picture. So we have two Christmas classics that were nominated for Best Picture in the same year. It was also nominated for Best Director, Henry Koster, Best Original Score, Best Film Editing, and ended up winning one for Best Sound.
Yes, and it does have really, really good sound, and I really enjoy it.
Especially when it comes to the music and the singing and all that stuff. You've got to watch this movie at least once because, my God, it was just so good. Yeah.
I'm going to disagree a little bit that it's not a must-see. It's still a good movie, but and Cary Grant, again, I would watch it just as a Cary Grant fan. If you like Cary Grant at all, or you're getting into film studies and you want to follow a great actor, Cary Grant is definitely a good case study to follow, and this is definitely one of the Hallmark movies that you should watch as part of Cary Grant's career.
Yeah, I know that they also tried doing a remake of this movie in the 90s with Whitney Houston. It was called The Preacher's Wife. But it didn't get as much love as this movie.
I didn't even know there was a remake. But then again, I didn't know that The Bishop's Wife existed until we started doing this episode.
With that said, what would you give this movie?
I'm going to give it I'm going to give it the same rating I gave the other movie. I'm going to give it a 3.
Well, I'm giving this a 4 because, like I said, it's just such a wonderful film.
It's still a pretty decent film in my book, and I love the special effects. I think there's some pretty good comedic timings. But there are other parts of it that I think kind of falter a little bit, like with the bishop himself. The bishop wasn't really a character I could really follow that intensely. And I felt that the ending of the movie where, the angel decided, oh, I gotta go. He literally just decided to just up and leave. And it was kind of a quick climax and a kind of a short ending.
You know, in a fun, strange way, this almost makes me think of Mary Poppins. A random person pops into someone's life for a cause. They get along with a bunch of people who suddenly have changed in their life, and then they go away.
It is Mary Poppins Christmas edition, but with Cary Grant.
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that description. That description alone bumps it to a 3.5 then.
Oh, really?
That description alone just made it go to a 3.5. So
that's good. That's good to hear.
All right.
Yeah. So that was The Bishop's Wife. So for our next film, we're going ahead to 1954, which was actually the highest-grossing film of that year, and this was a huge hit for big stars of that time. And this was also courtesy of one of the best songwriters of the 20th century, Irving Berlin. The film, White Christmas. A pair of World War II veterans meets a pair of sisters, and they decide to go to a lodge in Vermont. They have this idea for the veterans' former general. They want to give a Christmas spectacle, and they want to do all they can to make it like the best Christmas present they could give to the guy.
Now, there's actually another overarching story as well, and that is between the two veterans and the two sisters. But first, we got to get into the cast a little bit, don't we?
Oh, yes.
Good.
Well, let's talk about something else first. Now, when it comes to this film, it was actually the very first film to be in a certain widescreen format that we talked about last episode. It was called VistaVision, which is basically the aspect ratio you see right now.
Yeah, it was the very, very first film to use the 16:9 aspect ratio known as VistaVision. And I believe there are HD renditions of the movie that still exist in on the master tapes.
And then, of course, it became like the main widescreen format for the studio that the film was released from, Paramount.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when it comes to the director of this movie, Michael Curtiz, he actually had a number of musicals under his belt, but he's most famous for directing Casablanca, which earned him the Oscar.
Yeah, and it's actually interesting because this movie was written around the song itself. White Christmas had existed as a song.
Yes, it was
in the
really
1940s.
Yeah, it was originally made for the 1943-42 film Holiday Inn. Irving Berlin ended up winning the Oscar for Best Song. It is now named as one of the top 10 greatest songs in the American Film Institute.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess Irving Berlin decided, why not make a movie around the whole song?
Now, the interesting thing about that is that he did go to Paramount, but Paramount only took about 20% of the movie's gross revenue, I believe. And the budget was only like $2 million. It was not a high-budgeted film. And you can kind of tell that a little bit with the cast and the scenery. But we'll get into that a little bit later.
Let's talk about the cast.
Of course.
You had some huge names at that time. The two main stars, Bing Crosby and Danny Kaye. And they just work perfectly.
Oh, the chemistry between Danny Kaye and Bing Crosby is phenomenal. I love the that Bing Crosby was kind of the straight man, more mature of the two, and Danny Kaye was the more comedic one, the more conniving is not the word I'd use, but he was scheming a little bit to set up Bing Crosby.
Yeah, especially when it comes to trying to get him set up with one of the sisters.
Oh yeah,
the two sisters played by Rosemary Clooney and Vera Ellen.
Mm-hmm.
And my God, when it comes to the four of them, they are just amazing.
Amazing cast chemistry throughout the entire movie, and it was one of my favorite aspects of the movie was the chemistry between the four.
And you keep asking yourself, will they or won't they end up falling in love?
Well, it's the 1950s. They'll fall in love. It's the 1950s. Yeah. Of course they will.
And then you have Dean Jagger as the general, who they want to do a show for, and you can tell just how he's a nice guy. He's not like super tough like that drill sergeant in like say what was that movie from Stanley Kubrick? Full Metal Jacket.
Oh yeah. No, he's the kind of general that was like the more fatherly figure in World War II. one such that is the old hand from All Is Quiet on the Western Front. That would be kind of like a similar persona that I would compare to for another like famous war general.
Yeah. Well, also, when it comes to the other cast members too, I mean, you have Mary Wicks. She had a career that spanned decades. She was even one of the gargoyles in Disney's The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and it was just before she died.
Yeah.
Oh, and when it comes to the songs, all of them were written by Irving Berlin, and some of them are still so catchy.
Well, and a lot of them are still being replayed on radio today around Christmas time. Of course, White Christmas being one of them.
Yeah, I mean, you have such iconic songs like Snow, Sisters, the Oscar-nominated Count Your Blessings Instead of Sheep.
Mm-hmm. Not to mention the war song for the general.
Yes. Yeah. And like I said, Irving Berlin, this movie actually earned him another nomination for Best Song for Count Your Blessings Instead of Sheep.
Yeah, yeah. Now, I will criticize the film a little bit. The set. Not exactly the best set out there. You could definitely tell that even on the outdoor scenes, they were filmed indoors. The movie has a lot of the same problems I have as one of our first episodes surrounding musicals, which was The Music Man. I would say that it's about on par. The set design was about on par with The Music Man. Yeah, and that's my biggest criticism is that the set design wasn't exactly the best. But again, the movie didn't have that much of a budget, $2 million.
Yeah, but still, it does have some good things. I mean, the costumes, courtesy of a name that we've spoken about many times, the legendary Edith Head.
Who could forget Edith Head?
I mean, when it comes to the costumes she does for the women, they are just so modern, and they can also be so beautiful. I mean, especially the blue dresses that they wear in the Sisters sequence.
Yes, very, very vibrant blue. And of course, that was one of her specialties for any movie we've talked about, is vibrant colors. That was one of the things that when you have Edith get into set design at all, or costume design at all, you expect really, really bright and vibrant colors every time.
Yeah, and the cinematography, the Technicolor still looks perfect after all these years.
It still holds up.
Yeah, and then the editing's pretty good too. And like I said, the songs are pretty good as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, again, the songs are very, very good. Not my kind of music. I'm not a big band guy. I'm not a big band musical guy, but it's still like, if you're into that kind of stuff, it's a must.
And the dance sequences are pretty good too. I mean, the choreography is pretty impressive in some scenes.
Oh yeah, fantastic choreography. Again, this is the classical definition of a musical. I'd say it is right up there with The Music Man in terms of like being like, when you think musical, this is one of the movies that would come into my mind.
I guess I can't argue with that. I mean, and all the songs, like I said, Irving Berlin does a great job. He had a career that spanned for so long. If I recall, he died in the 80s.
Oh yeah. And one other criticism I had found when doing this movie review was that there was actually a little bit of drama with the script itself. Apparently, the original script that Berlin did for the movie was actually kind of boring, and they actually brought in other screenwriters that were uncredited to kind of spice up the movie and completely redo the filming so that it had a much more, not cohesive story, but more entertaining story.
Well, I guess that does make sense. I mean, a good screenplay is what makes a good movie in my book.
Yeah.
I mean, when it comes to certain movies, like say, well, I can't say anything at the moment, but if it has a really good screenplay, then you know that you have to watch it.
Yeah, well, Footlight Parade or any of the other movies that we reviewed during our 1930s episode of reviewing all those musicals from the 30s, those had some really good screenplays and good music. But I would say with White Christmas, the story is okay, not great, but okay, and you could definitely tell that, it was definitely a story that had to be revised a little bit. Once you realize, this movie had to be basically rewritten from the ground up with the surrounding the music.
I mean, they just couldn't remake. It's not like they could just redo like the entire original movie Holiday Inn.
No, they couldn't. but that's probably my two biggest criticisms: is the set design itself. Like the costume's fantastic, but the set design was a little weak, and the story was a little weak. But the music itself, but you can't enjoy it as like an actual movie for a compelling story. You're watching White Christmas for Bing Crosby. You're watching it for Bing Crosby. You're watching it for the singing. You're watching it for the music, not for the story.
Not just Bing Crosby, but for the other cast members too.
Yeah, like you. This is a movie that you don't just watch because it's a movie and it has a compelling story. You watch it because it's a Christmas movie. And you're watching it for the fact that you're gonna be enjoying a lot of really good Christmas music.
Yeah, and like I said, this ended up becoming the highest-grossing film of 1954, and even inflation-wise, is still one of the most successful films in American history.
And of course, I would completely agree that it was a very successful film.
So all in all, what would you give this movie?
I'm going to give this movie probably a 2.5. Again, I'm going back to it's not my kind of music. It's not my kind of music. It's not my kind, and I felt that the story was a little bit weak, and I felt the set design was a little weak. It's a great movie for people who enjoy musicals. I'm not a person that enjoys musicals.
Well, you may think that, but I'm giving it a 4 because I definitely think this is one of those films you got to watch around Christmas.
Oh, 100%. Like, if you love musicals, this is a must.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to other Christmas musicals I can think of, I mean, there's not that much.
No, there isn't. Most of the Christmas...
Most of them are more like for the kids.
Oh, yeah, but this is more of an adult's Christmas movie that, even if you don't have kids at home or anything like that, you can still enjoy.
Heck, I even remember seeing this when I was a little kid.
Oh, yeah, same here.
I mean, the first time I honestly saw this was in music class in elementary school. Shout out to my old music teacher, Miss Jolton.
The first time I watched it was when I was in middle school, but it was my stepmom. My stepmom's absolutely obsessed with all the Christmas movies. And White Christmas is one of those movies that was on every year on the TV in our living room, at least once. So yeah, I've seen it probably half a dozen times, maybe a dozen times.
Yeah, well, I definitely say you gotta watch this at least once.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Okay. So that was White Christmas. Now for our final film, we're doing a jump to 1970 with one of countless adaptations of one of the most iconic Christmas stories you can think of, Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol. Now, this version was a musical, and I gotta say, when I first saw this, I really enjoyed it.
We're talking about Scrooge, by the way.
Yep, from 1970, starring Albert Finney. Now, I'm pretty sure a lot of you know the story of A Christmas Carol. An old miser is visited by 3 spirits. He has to learn the spirit of Christmas, or else he's going to end up basically in eternal damnation like his old partner, business partner. And when it comes to this adaptation, I think it knocked it out of the park.
I actually never even heard of this adaptation before this. In fact, before this movie, I mean, we've all seen a rendition of The Christmas Story.
A Christmas Carol.
A Christmas Carol a few times.
The most popular one I can think of was the Disney version with Scrooge McDuck.
No, I would disagree. I would say that the Jim Henson version with the Muppets is more popular and also more notable.
Oh yes, with Michael Caine.
Mm-hmm.
They say that perhaps the best version of A Christmas Carol is actually from the 50s. It was a movie version starring Alistair Sim. And people say that he's the best version of Scrooge in film.
Yeah, I would agree. But I would actually argue this is probably the best version of the Christmas Carol out of all of them. In my opinion. And I have my own reasons why, but we're going to talk about, like, the cast first.
Yes.
We'll talk about that while we talk about
Yeah, let's
production.
talk about the main guy who plays Scrooge, Albert Finney, because, my God, he just knocks it out of the park.
Not only does he knock it out of the park with the character, but the makeup design. Literally removing and adding years to his complexion.
He was only 34 when he did this, and Scrooge is supposed to be like, I don't know, maybe in his 60s, 70s.
Yeah, and like in the scenes where he's like in his 20s, they removed 10 years. And then when they show him in his in his typical fashion, they literally added 30 years, and it looks so good.
Yeah. And then you have Alec Guinness as the ghost who tries to warn him. Jacob Marley.
Oh yeah. Again, I think that was probably one of the goofiest part, especially with the hand.
Oh yes. This is the first time. I mean, this is before he played Obi-Wan Kenobi in Star Wars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like if you're into Monty Python and Doctor Who and really bad horror movies from the 60s and 70s, you'll like this Christmas movie.
Yeah.
Honestly, because it has all those really off-putting elements of a British comedy and a really, really bad horror movie and somehow Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Early Doctor Who, not the current one. Early Doctor Who with, like, Tom Baker.
And then you have the other side characters like Bob Cratchit, of course the sick boy Tiny Tim.
Yeah, and you know what? I'm gonna say it. This was one. Even though this is my new favorite version of the Christmas Carol, it's my least favorite adaptation of Tiny Tim. But my favorite version of Bob Cratchit and Scrooge. Because I really enjoyed the, again, charismatic energy of Bob Cratchit throughout the movie. He had a lot of charisma to him. It was always positive. It was always in the Christmas spirit. He just oozed charisma, once again.
Yeah, and when it comes to the spirits themselves, I mean, you had some big names like Edith Evans as the Ghost of Christmas Past, Kenneth More as the Ghost of Christmas Present. Those were big names in British cinema.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And again, absolutely knocked it out of the park, especially with the interaction with Scrooge. Their interactions with Scrooge. Like even Scrooge going, "You don't look like you look way prettier than the Ghost of Christmas Past," and she's like, "Oh well, thank you." Like that sort of British wit, that British comedic wit, is sprinkled throughout the movie, and I absolutely adore it. I'm all for it.
And when it comes to the humor in this movie, it can be really good.
It's really good humor.
It can even be dark sometimes.
Oh yeah.
I mean, in one sequence alone, it's when Scrooge is visited by the Ghost of Christmas Future. He doesn't realize that he's witnessing his own basic funeral, and everyone's just cheering for him, and he doesn't even realize he's dead.
Yeah, that's pretty good. And that's another thing as well. It's like, okay, that last scene with the Ghost Christmas Future actually gave me a little bit of a jump scare. It did, because again, and not only that, but that scene with Marley where they're flying through the sky through the Christmas ghosts, like classic horror movie set designs from like right up there with Creature from the Black Lagoon and other really bad horror movie creature features from the 60s and 70s. Like it's that kind of cheesiness. I love cheesy horror movies, and it was a cheesy horror movie.
And when it comes to the sets, too, I mean, it basically brought Victorian London back to life.
I would say so, yes. One thing that actually surprised me was the interpretation of Scrooge's house, of how run down and dusty it was. I think the only ever, like, in the Muppets rendition, it's kind of seen as more of a cozier, homey sort of style. It's a little bit cozier and homey. Even though he's definitely a bachelor, you could definitely tell that it's at least cozy and at least warm in a cynical way. But with this one, like when he's lighting the fireplace, there's like no flame at all. Did you notice that there was like no flame? And when he walks into the house, there's a pillar like falling down. Like the house is borderline condemned.
Yeah.
And you would think a rich banker like himself would actually like be living in a nicer home than that. And in other renditions of Scrooge's house, I've seen it be quite a bit nicer. But this one was like the most run-down one of the batch.
Well, let's also talk about the costumes, because they really brought that era to life.
Oh, Old Town London, yes.
Yeah, I mean, they're very vibrant, they're very sophisticated.
I wouldn't call 70,000 Shades of Brown and Black vibrant, unless you're talking about the scenes where it's more of the happier memories of Christmas.
Yes, especially when it comes... And the choreography is pretty good, too.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, and yeah, the music, courtesy of the songwriter Leslie Brookus, who happened to be the songwriter for Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
Told you it wouldn't be the only time mentioned.
Yeah, he also did other movies like, he also did other musicals like Victor Victoria with Henry Mancini.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when it comes to the songs, some of them are really good.
They're really good. Yeah, you don't even, and they're integrated into the movie so smoothly. Like the integration into the movie was done really, really well.
I mean, when it comes to that whole scene with the wake,
Mm-hmm.
with Scrooge's future wake, I mean, the song "Thank You Very Much," that just so, it just really adds to the humor.
It's British humor. It is classic. If you like British humor at all, it's a must.
I mean, I found out that song was even Oscar nominated.
Oh yeah, it has the same kind of comedic energy as "Always Look on the Bright Side of Life" by Monty Python. It has the exact same energy of dark humor.
Oh yeah, I can definitely agree to that.
Again, it's the same era of British comedy we're talking. They're
Yeah.
both 1970. One's from the late 70s, one's from the early 70s. So it's kind of the same era of British comedy.
And when it comes to Albert Finney's version of Scrooge, you can definitely tell that he actually becomes a much more sympathetic character in some scenes. Like when it comes to the scene of him seeing his fiancée leaving him, he's actually talking to his past self, saying, "Don't do it."
Yeah, that you get a lot more emotional connection to Scrooge than compared to other ones. The only other time I've ever seen this much passion of a character with Scrooge, this much fear, was the most recent CGI version from the late 2000s.
Oh yeah, with Jim
Carrey, which everybody touts as the worst version of the movie.
Well, motion capture, that...
It was part of that dark age motion capture / CGI, because it's the same kind of era as the Polar Express and those kind of like later.
The Uncanny Valley era.
It was the Uncanny Valley era of CGI. But
Yeah.
that's the only other time I've seen this much emotion and expression done out of Scrooge.
Yeah, and Albert Finney, like I said, he knocked it out of the park.
100%.
And it was actually worth it because this movie earned him a Golden Globe for Best Actor.
Rightfully so. Rightfully so.
Yeah, and this was loved by critics.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was a box office success.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For a British film, yeah. And, part of the authenticity of the set as well was because it was filmed in an old part of London.
Yeah. It received 4 Oscar nominations, including Best Musical Score, Best Original Song, Thank You Very Much, Best Costume Design, Best Art Direction. It ended up losing musical score to the Beatles.
Not surprising.
Yeah,
It was the British wave. It was the British invasion.
It was actually the last movie they did just before they broke up, Let It Be.
Yeah, unsurprisingly. But then again, even Let It Be, in the historic context, is one of the best Beatles albums ever.
Yeah. Yeah, and like I said, this is definitely one of the best versions of A Christmas Carol I've seen.
This is my new favorite version of The Christmas Carol because of how bad it is. And I'm not saying, how bad I'm talking like the special effects being bad. The special effects were awful. And I love it. I love bad special effects because, again, it gives me the same energy as a bad horror movie. I'm surprised Svengoolie didn't do this. That's how bad this is. I'm surprised this hasn't been a Svengoolie special.
Yeah, well, it was only 1970, dude.
Yeah, have you seen all the other horror movies from back then? This is right up there with a Svengoolie horror movie special. This should be a Christmas movie special that Svengoolie reviews.
Yeah, well, this is definitely Scrooge is definitely a must-watch if you want to see a really good version of A Christmas Carol.
Or if you like really bad horror movies from that time frame.
Yeah. And when it comes to many versions, there's actually been one version that's actually won an Oscar. A year later, 1971, the animator Richard Williams did a short animated version, which was only about 25 minutes. Alistair Sim came back to voice Scrooge, and it ended up winning the Oscar for Best Animated Short Film. And the executive producer of that was Chuck Jones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, overall, I think it's time for a rating.
Oh,
How
yeah.
about you?
I'm definitely giving this a 4 because this is definitely a must-watch.
I'm giving it a 4.5.
Oh, yes.
Because, again, I love bad horror movies. This is a bad horror movie. I love British comedy from that time frame. This is British comedy. It has all my favorite elements of a period of film that not many people appreciate, and that is bad British horror films from the 1970s. That has a weird corner in my heart that I like. It tickled some parts of my brain that Christmas movies don't supposed to tickle. So this is not like your traditional Christmas movie. It's the Christmas Carol, but it's a rendition that I never thought would tickle certain parts of my brain.
I actually found out that Netflix did an animated remake of this just a few years ago, but that didn't get a lot of love.
No, it doesn't. Well, when you can only do a story so many times before, it's been kind of overdone.
And like I said, there's been so many adaptations. This is one of the most adapted stories put on film.
Oh yeah.
I mean, even as far back as the silent era, they were doing versions.
Yeah, and I would say that this is one of those scenarios where I think the Christmas Carol itself has been done too many times.
Well, it's so iconic too. I mean, it's been around for almost 200 years. It was originally published in 1843
By Charles Dickinson, yep.
by Charles Dickens, and it's one of the most iconic Christmas stories you can think of, like right next to like Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer or The Night Before Christmas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I would totally agree that it is an iconic one, but one that's been done too many times. You can have an iconic story and tell it in different way, and only tell it so many different ways.
And look at how many times this has been like parodied in like TV shows.
Oh yeah. The Simpsons probably did it once, or Family Guy. I'm assuming, but The Simpsons and Family Guy parody everything at some point, so who knows? Even if they haven't, they will.
Yeah, well, when it comes to Christmas, I love this time of year. You may not be a fan of it, but I am.
Hey, no, you got one good movie out of me. You got me to get one good movie rating.
Yeah. Yeah, so that was our take. So when it comes to the new year, we're going to be looking at a studio that you might be familiar with Christmas specials, but we're not reviewing any of their Christmas specials.
Oh.
I am talking about the former popular TV studio, Rankin Bass. We're looking at 4 films that were made by them, but it's none of their like stop motion animated Christmas specials. It's with 2 of them, we're actually going to Middle Earth.
Hey, we're back in my era. We're back in my wheelhouse.
Until then, I'm Chris Wyatt.
And I'm Jacob Demuth.
Merry Christmas to everyone, and thank you very much for watching Chris's Classic Cinema.
Happy holidays.